Hey guys, it's the Atheist Guard here. My name's Gregory Dirth. I'll be doing a presentation right now on guns, gun control, and the irrational arguments regarding gun control. Because though I share a lot of liberal ideals, I disagree with their positions on firearms. A lot. I think they make a lot of irrational arguments when it comes to firearms, demonstrating a lack of knowledge, a lack of understanding of firearms, and I'm going to be going through some of those here. So I've created this presentation using open source software mainly, but I did also use a video game, quote unquote game, that you can get on Android and I believe Apple devices called Gun Disassembly 2. Excellent program for understanding how firearms work and the variety of firearms. And I'm basically using rational skepticism to look at the gun arguments, the gun control arguments. And of course, by rational skepticism, I'm talking about that you don't just accept assertions without looking to them first. You have to be first skeptical of them and use common sense and evidence at the same time to evaluate any assertion or any claim. And you always proportion the evidence to the claim. So I'm going to be applying these principles to the various gun arguments, but a lot of it just comes down to knowledge. What liberals are actually saying is that assault rifles are the big problem, assault rifles are weapons of war, and automatic firearms are the biggest problem that needs to be addressed. And that's just patently absurd and false. They have no idea what they're talking about, and I'll give you plenty of examples to demonstrate that these aren't just straw man arguments, that I'm not just like picking and choosing here. I'll be using actual quotes from liberals to demonstrate my point. Now, the truth is, the FBI statistics show that rifles account for a small fraction of all deaths. I mean, it's just a fact. And I'm going to define what an automatic firearm is and what assault rifles actually are, and demonstrate some of the really dumb liberal policies that they've come up with and or that they're proposing in reference to California, Canada. I'll be looking at the difference between an AK type rifle and a VZ. If you don't know what those are, just wait, I'll get into that. And I'll be looking at mag capacity versus reloading, and if that even matters, if that's something that even should be addressed by law. And of course, what banning certain types of rifles might actually do for the better good. I mean, would it even have an effect? Now, the FBI statistics show clearly that handguns account for the vast majority of all deaths. I mean, you're looking at over, I think, 5,700 per this slide here, and rifles only account for 285. I mean, if I scroll down this statistics list here, rifles 285, that's less than blunt objects, less than knives, less than fists, people just using their bare hands to kill somebody. So that's the significance of rifles in this regard. Handguns are the problem. But it's not the handguns themselves, but it's the people using the handguns that are the problem. And there's a black market that needs to be talked about a lot more. I mean, this is what kills most people. It's a handgun. Basically cheap handguns too. Not even really good ones. And of all the gun types, of which there are many, this is from Gun Disassembly 2. Handguns are just a small subset and the less expensive option, which is why they're used most. I mean, you're not going to use an expensive caliber weapon if you're intending just to do it for criminal reasons. This is a chart of all the different ammunition types. And of course, this is a nice little meme showing, hammers murdered 496 people in 2011, whereas rifles only murdered 323. And we're not talking about banning hammers, are we? And we're talking about banning rifles of that specific type. That's like an AR type rifle in that picture there. Now in Canada, one of these is legal and one of these is illegal. The one on the top is a VZ58, which is actually a rifle I personally own. I absolutely adore this rifle. It's wonderful. But it shoots the exact same caliber, has a very similar rate of fire as the AK-47, which is this rifle here. But one's considered legal and one isn't. And this is because they went around, the way they went around banning rifles, they did it specifically by model type and excluded the VZ 2008, which is the civilian version of the VZ 58, and not by anything that actually matters. Now here's a quote from a liberal. What is the efficacy of banning these magazine clips? I will tell you, these are ammunition, they're bullets, so people who have those know they're going to shoot them. So if you ban them in the future, the number of these high-capacity magazines is going to decrease dramatically over time because the bullets will have been shot and there won't be any more available. That's patently absurd. She clearly has no idea what she's talking about. She doesn't know what a magazine is, she doesn't know what an ammunition is or how it relates to magazines, and I'm telling you right now, banning high-capacity magazines does not make them cease to exist. They don't get used up. Now here's a picture of all three of these things. The magazine is the big metal thing hanging down from the bottom of the gun there. I mean, it attaches to the gun. It contains rounds. It contains the ammunition. To the right of that, you see a clip. The clip is not a magazine. A magazine is not a clip. A clip holds rounds in a strip so that you can feed them into the top of a firearm. Now, most firearms that use clips don't actually have detachable magazines, and you see this a lot in hunting rifles or old World War II style rifles. This particular rifle, the VZ, you can actually feed it with a clip, which will load the magazine underneath, or you can just load magazines from underneath and chamber rounds directly that way. I mean, either way, you're loading a magazine with rounds. The strip, the clip itself is just a strip of metal that helps feeding rounds into a weapon quickly. And you can feed them in individually, one at a time, push them in, and your thumb gets kind of sore after you get down to the 29th and 30th round, pushing it into that magazine because there's a spring pushing up against it. But that's what that is. I mean, they're different things. So here's another one. These bullets, as you saw, have incendiary device on the tip of it, which is a heat-seeking device, so you don't shoot deer with a bullet that size, and you could cook it at the same time. This person has no idea what they're talking about. That is not what an incendiary round is at all. Incendiary rounds burn. That's all they do. They don't heat-seek anything. They're not heat-seeking. They generate heat, but they don't look for things by heat. That's absurd. And people don't kill people with incendiary rounds most of the time, unless you're in war or something. You can see the difference in price here. $15 for 6 rounds of incendiary ammo. And that doesn't even feed into most handguns. I mean, you're not going to find a handgun that shoots an incendiary round most of the time. Handguns shoot the 9mm. That's a pretty popular round for handguns. 100 rounds, $20. Now guess which one the criminals are going to use. I mean, of all the ammo types, and here's the list here, these are the ones that you would hunt with. And you notice how wide the range is, that it goes from extremely small rounds to extremely huge rounds, and it depends on what you're trying to kill. And so yes, you do use ammo of a large size to kill certain types of animals. And hopefully you're trying to eat them. You're not just shooting things to see them die. You're actually going to hunt for practical reasons and not just for sport, although I don't have anything against it necessarily. I just think that it's kind of a waste. But there's the 223 round. That's what you find in most ARs. It's not even one of the biggest rounds. And it only works for smaller game, like predators, varmints, that kind of thing. And that's where it is on the big scale of all the possible weapon ammunition types. Now, I don't think this is a comprehensive list of everything, but that's a lot of them. And you can see it's just one of the smaller rounds at the top left there. It's not ridiculously huge. So I don't know why she thinks this is you don't need a round that big. It's not even that big. It's a 22 with a really good amount of power behind it. Now, the one I'm circling there is the 7.62 by 39 round that you see in an AK platform rifle. We call them AKM when they're a civilian type rifle. AK-47 is specifically the military rifle, although that's become a generic term, so I kind of understand the confusion. But an AK-47 would typically be an automatic rifle. An AKM is typically a semi-automatic rifle, and there is a difference. Now here's another good quote from a liberal here. This is a ghost gun. This right here has the ability with a 30 caliber clip to disperse with 30 bullets within half a second. 30 magazine clip within half a second. Of course, he said it in a much more drunken, slow, and you could tell he didn't know what he was saying. He was holding up an AR platform rifle and uttering this nonsense. There's no such thing as a 30 caliber clip. There's no such thing as a 30 round clip, as far as I know. I usually get clips in like 10 rounds, 8 rounds, or something like that. Caliber is the size of the bullet. So again, we go back to this picture here. 30 caliber clip, that doesn't even make sense. You have a clip that holds a certain number of rounds. You have a magazine that holds a certain number of rounds. And in no case does an AR fire 30 rounds in half a second. It just doesn't happen. You know, it's just an impossibility. I mean, even a fully automatic M16 like you would see in the military, which is different from an AR. An AR is a typically a, you know, semi-automatic weapon, doesn't fire that fast. This is what kills most people. Handguns. They're semi-automatic. They don't fire a spray of bullets if you hold the trigger back. You have to pull the trigger once for every round that comes through. Now you can do that pretty quick and get a pretty rapid fire, but that decreases your accuracy. And as you see in like an AK type rifle, if you hold, you can fire it in single fire mode, or you can pull the trigger back and let a whole spray of bullets come out. But you're not going to be buying that. You're not going to be buying the fully automatic version unless you got a lot of money and pass through a whole mess of background checks and paperwork. These aren't things that are a problem. They're not out there. I mean, these are machine guns. These would have a high fire rate. You know, I don't think half a second is remotely possible on most of these types of machine guns. But yeah, you can spray a whole bunch of bullets with these, but you're also not buying these at gun stores or gun shows or from private sellers unless you got a ton of money. I think I saw one for like $18,000. Now, criminals aren't doing that. They're not spending 18 grand or, you know, in that kind of price range to buy a weapon to do dirt with. I mean, it's just not realistic. I don't know where they get this idea that automatic weapons are bad. I mean, they say semi-auto a lot, but semi-auto is just one bullet coming out of the barrel every time you pull the trigger. That's all that means. And that applies to hunting rifles, pistols, you know, all of them. Now, what do the liberal gun controls look like? Both of these firearms are identical. It's the same exact gun. You just swap out a bunch of parts and you get the bottom version. But the bottom version's illegal. The top version isn't illegal in places like California, where they have nonsensical gun, you know, I mean, the one on the bottom is no more lethal than the one on the top. Even the barrel length is about the same. They shoot the same ammo. They're both semi-automatic, so you got to pull the trigger once to release one round, and you have to let the trigger go to reset it so you can fire the next round. So you can only fire rounds as fast as you can pull the trigger. You can't just hold it back and hope that it sprays. It's not going to spray. It's going to fire one round, and if you keep holding that trigger back, nothing else is going to happen. Just one round's going to come out. But the one on the bottom's illegal, you know, because it's got a little, you know, it's got a hand grip that sticks out from the bottom. That doesn't make it more lethal. It's got an extendable buttstock so you can make it more comfortable. That doesn't make it illegal. Most people pull that buttstock out pretty far anyway so they can get closer to what that one on the top looks like. So they have a place to rest their cheek and they get a nice alignment with the sights. So this is just one of those nonsensical gun control measures that you see being implemented. It doesn't address crime. It doesn't address, you know, mass murder or death. They demonstrate a clear lack of knowledge in reference to firearms. This is a California legal AR type rifle. Now note the difference here. It's got a buttstock connected to the hand grip. The buffer tube has to sit there on its own with a cheek rest on it, but that makes it legal because the buttstock isn't connected to the buffer tube and the handguard is connected to the buttstock. That somehow makes it legal. It doesn't make it any less lethal. It doesn't make it any less potent a weapon if you were intending to do harm with it, which is a misuse of that tool. But that's what makes it legal. Now, of course, they've also done a few things like make the magazines smaller. Okay, That's nice. So now you have less rounds to work with, but you can have more than one magazine. So that they came up with this thing called the magazine button, where you have to use a special tool to make the magazine fall out to put a new one in. Well, that can be defeated easily. I would doubt that a criminal would be inclined to not modify their weapon so that they could easily change magazines. They wouldn't bother with the reduced magazine capacity in the first place. If they are intending to do harm with it, they would just pop a 30-round magazine in this same weapon, and it would be equivalent to a standard sporting AR, which you're going to see here in the next slide. So this is okay in California. Very powerful weapon, still uses that tiny little .223 round, but that's good enough to kill somebody, of course, and a lot of small game. But this right here is illegal in California. It's a AR that's used for sporting purposes. Same exact ammo, has a little bit more magazine capacity than the other one. The handguard's not connected to the buttstock, but this one's not illegal in California. The change that they made has no effect, zero effect on the lethality of the weapon. Zero effect. You could put that same scope, as a matter of fact, on the one that's legal in California, and it would still be illegal. So yeah, this is another superficial change that does nothing. And it ignores the statistics, because again, they're addressing rifles. They're not addressing the handguns. They'll have strict handgun rules too, but they're banning rifles. Banning certain types of rifles, because they're big and scary looking. They have, they just look meaner. It's irrational. It has absolutely nothing to do with the problem. It has nothing to do with the problem. The real problem is the immorality that it takes to kill somebody with anything, be it a gun or otherwise. Our mental health care and our current health care in the United States is lacking, to say the least. Our background check system doesn't take into account mental health directly. There's this huge wall between those two things integrating. The background check system is actually inefficient on its own. It doesn't get updated quickly. Systems don't talk to each other between state, police, local, federal, and the mandatory sentences for gun crimes are stupidly low, and people can bargain their way out of it. They can plea out of certain charges to make lesser charges. So they can actually get out on bail after using a gun in a crime. Now, we have a right to bear arms in America. Second Amendment guarantees that right. It was our founders' intentions to ensure that we had the right to bear arms. And they didn't put any qualifiers on that whatsoever. And people will often look at the Second Amendment and say that it somehow implies that only a well-trained militia is supposed to have firearms. But that's not what it says at all. As a matter of fact, I'm going to bring up the Second Amendment here on my computer so I can quote it directly to you and explain what the two-entity interpretation actually is. Now, that's a term I came up with. Okay. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now notice they got two separate groups here. Actually, it's more of a set and a subset. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And this is because a well-regulated militia is necessary to the security of a free state. The well-regulated militia is part of the people. Not all the people are the well-regulated militia. That's just a subset of the people. Just like our police are a subset of the people. They maintain the security of a free state. Our military does the same thing. They maintain the security of the entire country in that case. But a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. It doesn't say the right of the militia to bear arms shall not be infringed. It's talking about everybody, the people. That means if you're a banker, a farmer, a dentist, you have a right to carry a handgun because we gave all these other people handguns. This militia that we have to have for security. They have to have guns, so we might as well give everybody guns because of that subset is going to have guns, and we don't want them turning on you necessarily. And this is well expressed in opinions offered by our founding fathers and other documents. The Federalist Papers, you read any of them, they will justify this two-party interpretation that they were worried based on what Britain had done when they had their own little militia running around regulating security and violating security at gunpoint, they recognize that as a potential threat, that the state could be used to oppress the people, and if the people didn't have a right to have arms, that makes it all the much easier. I mean, it's just ridiculously easy to oppress somebody if they're not allowed to have guns, and you are. Now, going back to the presentation here, I am not a conspiracy theorist. I don't think it's remotely probable that we'll ever be in a situation where the country turns on us, where the government turns on us and wants to oppress everybody such that we have to stand up with our firearms against them. But that was the intention. That is why we have the Second Amendment, is to keep that from happening. It's a deterrent. And I understand the argument that, yeah, it's a deterrent except for the fact that the government has the military, which has vastly superior firepower to you, blah, 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 and your little semi-automatic rifle isn't going to be squat compared to an Apache helicopter shooting at you. Well, yeah, of course. But it's better than nothing. I mean, you can either be completely powerless or at least have some ability to have some level of resistance should something go awry. And I don't for a second think that the military would ever fight against the American people directly, because I took the oath. I was in the military. I know how we think about that oath, that we're defending the Constitution against all threats, foreign and domestic. And that if for some reason in some dystopian future there was a dictatorship established that was tyrannical or something, I'd be surprised within a week if there wasn't some sort of a military coup to overthrow that dictatorship and reestablish our constitutional republic. That's how I would see that going down. I don't for a second think that there's any possibility that the military would be turned on its own people. So they'd be fighting on our side. I mean, they would have to get consignment military from foreign nations to fight on their behalf if they wanted to be a tyrannical dictatorship in America. And the US military would fight them. So I don't see that being the issue. The main thing that I think about when it comes to having gun rights in America is that we have a right to self-defense. If the criminals have guns, we should have guns too. We should have the exact same guns that criminals have access to. And generally speaking, we do. Now, placing restrictions on the guns you're illegally allowed to own affects the law-abiding citizen who will pay attention to those restrictions and laws. Doesn't affect the criminal in the slightest, because there's a black market. And unless you address the black market, you're not going to solve this problem. Unless you address that end of the equation, what affects the criminal, you're not going to solve the gun violence problem in America. Addressing it from the end of the law-abiding citizen doesn't solve anything at all. Gun-free zones, no guns allowed signs, they don't do anything except deter law-abiding citizens from carrying guns. So that's how I want to wrap up this gun presentation, is just pointing out some key things that liberals don't seem to understand when it comes to firearms. Automatic rifles are extremely expensive and rare. Most people don't have automatic rifles or firearms of any type that are automatic, because they're like 20 grand, 15 grand. You know, you're not going to be seeing people buying these things in droves. Most crime is done by handguns. Well, rather by criminals using handguns, misusing that tool to kill innocent people. It is a tool. It's meant to defend innocent life, not kill innocent people. If you misuse it, you know, that makes you a criminal. And that's how we define it. It's just saying, it goes back to the hammer versus the rifle example. It's like, yeah, hammers kill more people than rifles do every year. Sorry, that's a fact. It's a misapplication of that tool. And as we can see in many cases, like San Bernardino or Paris, France, banning rifles of a certain type don't prevent criminals from obtaining them and using them on the unarmed populace. It just doesn't, because there's a black market. You have to address the black market. Now, I'm not even going to pretend to understand how that even works in America, or how you would even go about addressing the black market in a serious way. But it seems obvious to me that the politicians are just ignoring that aspect altogether on both sides. I don't hear the right wing or the left wing talking about addressing the black market of firearms at all. They don't. One side just wants to keep their guns, and the other side wants to take guns or restrict guns. And they're ignoring the big problem, which is this ability for criminals to buy weapons that the rest of us don't have access to, or might not have access to if there are certain laws in our area. So, automatic firearms, if you pull the trigger back, it'll keep shooting rounds until you release the trigger. You only got to pull it once, and unless you release it, it'll use up all the ammunition stored in a magazine. A magazine is a storage container for ammunition. A clip is a strip of metal that holds rounds together that you can use to feed into a firearms magazine from the top or bottom of a firearm. And that's typically on old school type of guns. Semi-automatic is the vast majority of firearms, including handguns. They're all semi-automatic, almost all. And that just means when you pull the trigger once, one round comes out the barrel. And you can pull the trigger pretty fast, but you got to pull it each time you want to release a round. Every time you want to fire a round, you have to pull the trigger once. That's all semi-automatic means. So when someone says semi-automatic rifle, they're making it sound like more than what it is. Semi-automatic just means you pull the trigger, a round comes out. They're adding that adjective to make it sound scarier because people don't understand what that term means. That it basically means this is a normal firearm. This isn't some militarized weapon that can fire in automatic mode. This is a semi-automatic firearm, which is typically what civilians end up with. The vast majority of firearms are going to be semi-automatic for civilians. And that's the distinction between what I would call an assault rifle and a civilian version of an assault rifle. Now, ATF will define assault rifle however they wish in nonsensical terms, but to me, if it's not ever used in a military assault, it's not an assault rifle. An AR-15 is not used in military assaults. That is a civilian version of the M16 or M4 military firearm that can shoot in automatic mode or burst fire mode. It doesn't do the same thing. It's not the same severity of weapon. The weapons that are used in war, weapons of war, are not the weapons that civilians end up buying. We end up buying cool-looking firearms that kind of look like the ones that are used in the military and use the same caliber perhaps, but don't shoot the same fire rate. They are semi-automatic. You got to pull that trigger once for every round that leaves the barrel, or you're going to be going through crazy background checks, paying massive fees to the ATF to get clearance to have a firearm that can shoot in automatic mode. And then you have to basically finance a car. That's the equivalent price of one of those firearms. You're buying an extremely expensive item that you can't use at most ranges. So it kind of defeats the purpose. I wouldn't, even if I had that kind of money, I wouldn't go out of my way to own an automatic firearm because I wouldn't be able to shoot it anywhere. It just wouldn't be useful because ranges don't let you use automatic firearms, largely. So that's the differences. An assault weapon is used to do assaults in the military. And these are not semi-automatic firearms in most cases. Semi-automatic firearms often look like military weapons, but are qualitatively different. They're different. And when you say semi-automatic rifle, you're not saying anything extraordinary. You're just saying rifle. because the vast majority of rifles are now semi-automatic. I mean, you got some bolt-action rifles out there that you have to rack every time you want to chamber a round and some things like that, but most people, when they hear the term rifle, they're probably picturing in their head a semi-automatic type rifle. You know, it's just one of these things where the terminology matters. And don't let people scare you into thinking they got a solution when their solution only addresses the law-abiding citizen side of the equation and doesn't do anything to deter crime, because it's not addressing the criminal. It's not increasing their sentences. It's not restricting their ability to plea bargain. It's not, you know, addressing the black market. It's not doing anything that would affect a criminal. It's just affecting people that would pay attention to those laws in the first place, which are the law-abiding citizens. The non-criminals, by definition. All right, well, that's the end of my presentation. I hope you liked it. If you think I got anything wrong, let me know. If you want me to go into further detail about this two-party interpretation of the Second Amendment, or there's a distinction between the people as the group and the subgroup being the militia, and that it's because of that we need to have the people have equivalent right to have arms. I mean, it seems kind of stupid for me to even contemplate why people would interpret the militia as not having arms in the first place. It's like they're a militia, they have to have arms. Why would you create an amendment to say the militia has a right to bear arms? That's like saying, well, the military has a right to bear arms. Well, duh, they're the militia, they're the military. Of course they get to have arms. The only reason you would even make a right like that to begin with is if you wanted to make something different, that you wanted to state something that wasn't blatantly obvious. And in this case, it's that the people shall have a right to bear arms. Because the militia already has arms. All militias have arms. You know, you wouldn't make a right that says the militia has a right to have arms. That just doesn't make any sense. And you can see this rationalization if you look into the matter. Now, I'll do a video on that if you want me to, explaining the various quotes of the Founding Fathers, so you can see exactly what they were thinking. They explained this line of thinking, that we're going to be a unique country because we're going to give everybody the right to have a firearm. Militias, of course, have firearms. They explain this. I'm not just making this up. I'm not pulling this out of my ass. This is not an interpretation I came up with. This is looking at what they said, what they intended, and then looking at how it is written in the Second Amendment and saying, oh, that does make sense if you consider what they were thinking when they were coming up with the Constitution. When they were thinking about this amendment, you can see why they worded it that way. And that it's not this confusing mishmash where we're basically saying the militia should be the only people with guns. That's not what it says at all. And liberals like to think that's what it says, but it's not what it says at all. And if you look at what the Founding Fathers were thinking at the time, it demonstrates this to a fact. I mean, I'll do a video on that. It needs to be clearly outlined for some people. I don't know if I'll get to it anytime soon, because I think for now this particular presentation is good enough to prove my point that liberals have severe misconceptions about guns, don't know what they're talking about in a lot of cases, and they need to understand that the problem is not being addressed properly. I completely agree that there needs to be some sort of gun restrictions, some measures that need to be taken to deter violence, but I think we're going about it the completely wrong way. And it's always a black and white thing. Either you let them have all the guns or you ban things based on stupid reasons. There's no in between or no sensible, logical, rational discourse to solving this problem. It's not even being discussed. Anyways, thank you for watching my video, and I'll catch you later.